Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Exposed Vet Productions. My name is John Stacy. I'm Exposed Vet. It's www.exposedvet.com. My co-host, as always, Mr. Ray Cobb of the great state of Tennessee. How you doing, Ray?
I'm doing great, I think. I hope. I hope I
Yeah.
got this computer turned on and working right.
Oh yeah, you got it looking pretty good, man. But I'm sitting here in my man cave. You're sitting in your man cave, and we're going to discuss a topic that's kind of been taboo for many, many years. It's post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and we're going to discuss basically what it is, and we're going to give a couple of examples of what to do and what not to do. And Ray
Sounds
did a
good to me.
yeah, Ray, you did a show earlier in the week on your show, and you guys discussed this poor guy in Eastern Tennessee, and he had PTSD, and kind of explain to the masses what this poor feller did.
Yeah, it was kind of an unusual. It's the only situation I've heard of like this. This happened back in, I believe it was 2018. A young man, he served over in Iraq, did 2 tours of duty over there, and he was diagnosed with PTSD. Um, After he got back and got out of the service after 6 years, I think he did 6 years, maybe 8 years. I'm thinking
Mm-hmm.
6 years of service. And he got out and was having a problem holding a job and was married, had 2 children, and he had some of the basics that you know about with PTSD. Got diagnosed, got rated 100% for PTSD. And he reached out on Facebook and made contact with a lot of old high school friends, and one of them happened to be an old high school girlfriend that he dated his junior and senior year in high school, and then they kind of went their separate ways, and he ended up going to the military, and she married another guy and living out in Dallas, Texas. And what he did, she started, we don't know why, she never said why, but she started playing off of him and eventually convinced him to get rid of her husband. Uh,
Whoa.
she convinced him that her husband was abusive to her and her children. She
Mm-hmm.
was actually in a car wreck, took some photographs of that car wreck, which had happened 2 or 3 years earlier, but posted them or sent them to him, stating that her husband had beat her that weekend, or he cut her with a knife, or he did this, and had a black eye one time and a big bruise on her back, and evidently almost all of these were occurred from this car wreck. And her husband was worked for had a good job working for American Airlines. They lived just outside of Dallas, and it was financially they were fine. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but he convinced her that she was being abused and how she hated him, and that now she claims she went to the police and the police wouldn't do anything, and he
Mm-hmm.
told her to take out a restraining order. She was scared to do it, says he'll kill me and my children, and all these type of things. And he believed her, and it kept going on and going on and going on. And finally, he said, "I'll take care of it." He said, "We learned how to take care of our own." Um, Now you got to understand another part. This young man was born, raised in East Tennessee, and you being up there from Eastern Kentucky, where I am down in Southern Tennessee, back in the old days, if I'm going to call it the old days, back in the 30s, if a guy was ugly, beating his wife or whatever, some of the other friends would go and, like a better term, take him out behind the woodshed and teach him a lesson. That was just kind of the way it was done back there. Well, this guy carried it to the far extreme. He got in his vehicle and drove to Dallas, went to where she lived, never saw her, hadn't seen her since she was in high school. She hid out at a vacant house a couple of doors down and
Mm-hmm.
watched for 2 or 3 days and got his pattern. This guy would come out at 7 o'clock in the morning to walk the dog, then would go in and come back out at 20 till 8 and go to work. And that was an
Mm-hmm.
everyday routine. The kids would come out at 7:30 and would get on the school bus to go to school. So he got the routine down, and about 3 or 4 days after getting that down, he hid in the bushes beside the house, and he came out at 7 o'clock to walk the dog. He stepped out of the bushes, shot him 3 times, killed him, went back, ran back into the back, jumped over the fence, got in his car on the roads parked behind him, and took off and came back to Tennessee.
Hmm.
So they were able through emails, because they were looking at her. He had a pretty good life insurance policy and stuff. So in looking
Hmm.
at her, they found these emails about him. And
Mm.
so they tracked him down, and he admitted what he did, but he said that was my PTSD that kicked in. And he said the military taught me how to kill and how to protect people I love and to protect my country, and that's what I was doing. I was protecting somebody that I loved.
Hmm.
And the jury didn't buy it. He ended up, I think, with about 50 years up here in prison now. Um,
Hmm.
but that's sometimes, do I believe PTSD did it?
It was
Probably
premeditated, buddy.
played a part in it.
Yeah.
But you got to learn to control it, and that's probably one of the most important things we can share with our listeners, and is that there's different levels, everything from a 20%, up to 100%. Um,
They they tried him
if
in
you,
Texas.
yeah, they got him in Texas, and he's serving prison out there in Texas. Um,
Well, he's
so,
lucky to be serving time at all in Texas. You do something like that in Texas, it's usually Mr. Sticky or the electric chair, ain't it?
well, I think they usually give him a shot there now. But
Mm-hmm.
that being said, if it hadn't have been for her involvement and her trying to convince him to do it, and the fact that he did have records of being mentally unstable,
Mm-hmm.
that probably kept him from getting the shot in the needle in the arm. That's probably
No.
the only thing that kept him from doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he got something like 55 years, and she got 15 years for
Mm-hmm.
setting it up and convincing him. So, kind of an interesting story about PTSD, but and
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many others around the country are like that. I just happened to run into that one, and it caught my interest.
Mm-hmm. I met
Um,
several.
and I've heard of an
Mm-hmm.
awful lot of suicides. I mean, somebody the other day, I was down in Murfreesboro at the VA hospital and was talking to a public relations gentleman there, and he was looks real proud. He said, "Yeah, we have PTSD. We've got that down to somewhere around 35 a day." Well, he's right. That's better than the 44 that it was just a year or so ago. However, 35 is still too many. That means at least, what, every 50 minutes, somewhere along in there, that a veteran has committed suicide from PTSD. So that's
Yeah.
still outrageous, and that doesn't take into account. I mean, I know another gentleman right here in Franklin County, Tennessee, uh, suffered from PTSD, um, and he had an anger management problem. He actually went around and mowed yards because he couldn't hardly work with anybody or get along with anyone. And his wife had a good job at one of the banks locally. Um, he caught her with another guy and beat her up and killed the other guy. And then we got one of his friends to bury him, and the other friend got scared and went to the police and told him about what happened. And so he's now serving time here in Tennessee. I think he got 75 years, if I'm
Well, for an
right.
accessory, for an accessory.
No, he was the one that did it. The guy, the accessory, the guy that helped him bury the man,
Mm-hmm.
he got 10 years and 5 years probation.
Mm-hmm.
So he had to serve 5 years and then he got probation. So you never know where this PTSD can take you guys. So you need to be aware of it. You need to face up the fact that you may have it. To what degree, only a psychologist and going through counseling can actually determine to what level and what degree you need, and whether or not it's something you can handle with counseling and talking to other vets that have it, or whether or not you need medication. Um, there's not any shame in admitting it and going into that. And everybody said, "Well, they'll take my guns." Well, unless you show and state a fact that you're going to try to hurt somebody or harm somebody or make a threat against somebody, they're not going to take your guns. Not in Tennessee anyway. I don't know about other states,
Hmm.
but in Tennessee, they're not going to do that.
Hmm.
They probably wouldn't do it in Texas either. But in any case, guys,
Well, there's a stipulation with that as far as PTSD, mental health issues. I mean, you can be 100% mental health. You don't have to have PTSD. You can have a severe depression, anxiety, and things like that. As long as you're pretty much cognitive, and when you go, your exam that gives you your rating, the psychiatrist is going to ask you this and this, and he's going to make a determination if you can pay your bills or not. And if you cannot pay your bills, they go to and they assign you a fiduciary to pay your bills for you. And usually, in most cases, it's your spouse or somebody like that. But sometimes they have to use a law firm or an attorney to do that. And that rolls the ball right there because you have to have a fiduciary. You don't have the responsibility to pay your bills. They don't think you have the responsibility to own a firearm. And I've known four or five that's had that situation, and they sure enough had to turn them in. But there's bills now passed in different states to get that overturned. Not to stop it, but say if they improve and get better, then they get their firearms back. So,
okay,
but that's the key point. It's like when we talk about special monthly compensation, the door that opens up the vault to the higher levels of special monthly compensation is S&C level L, which is aid and attendance, right?
right.
Well, the bad door is if you get stuck with the fiduciary, then that opens up to the door to a whole host of problems. One of them being, if they will, they can come and confiscate your weapons, you know. So,
Yeah,
okay. But there's a lot of doors in the VA, a lot of cracks and hoops too, but you know how that is, right?
yeah.
But, let's talk a little more about PTSD in itself. Now, post traumatic stress disorder. Um, some of the main causes for PTSD was the main cause is combat. Somebody's trying to kill you, you're trying to kill them. I mean, it can leave a lasting impression on you. And that's pretty much, if you're a combat veteran and you claim that, then and but the result, if you got the right paperwork and it shows you were a combat vet, then they have to take your word for it. All they have to do is justify the severity of the case. Then there's other ways you get PTSD too. You don't have to be a combat vet. You say, for example, you worked on board. Uh, Say you was at a base that transferred the bodies from a port to a ship or whatever, done that, and you handle all that. Well, that's kind of gruesome too. Or in the air, the air that's taking them back and forth and things like that, or anything that's traumatic. And that's another issue. Um, the military is a dangerous place. Um, Contrary to popular belief, there are bad eggs in the military. Military does have issues, when it comes to everyday life. Back when I was in, they had a little bit of a drug problem. Of course, it all started in Vietnam. You remember those days, don't you, Ray?
Oh, I do.
And so you got to be careful because if you do something the wrong way and you tip off the wrong people, then especially you're in the Navy, you might go swimming or they're going to try to beat you to death. And so you got to be careful. And that can cause PTSD too, a personal assault, and things like that. It's combat related because I mean, they're trying to kill you. If you get beat up by, if you get beat up by a piece of equipment that belongs to the military, according to James, it's kind of a combat injury, isn't it?
That's yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There,
That's it.
when you get into it, there's a there's not any difference as far as treatment
Mm-hmm.
or severity between combat veteran and
Mm-hmm.
an individual for whatever reason, that has severe depression
Hmm.
with high anxiety attacks.
Hmm.
Now, how can that happen? I know of one or two that they were they were athletes growing up. They were strong.
Hmm.
They had a lot of uh, physical ability, and then the exposure to Agent Orange.
Hmm.
Um, in one guy's case was through the Air Force. Um, it caused him to come down with diabetes and ischemic heart disease and all the things that go along with it.
Hmm.
And he became depressed because he couldn't do what he had planned his whole life doing in retirement, fishing, playing golf, playing with
Hmm.
his grandkids, all of that stuff went by the wayside. So he
Hmm.
became pretty depressed and um, because his lifelong dreams and ideas were shattered. Well,
Hmm.
he finally got into counseling and he's doing a lot better today. Um, he still doesn't go out in public very much. He still doesn't, participate in a lot of activities in groups.
Hmm.
But overall, I think he's accepted his condition pretty well. Um, and then another one that we've talked about before on this show, who just recently, um, his job, he has 100% PTSD, and his job was he was an intelligence guy. And he was over in Iraq or Afghanistan, and he read the newspapers and figured out he had names of individuals that the our forces were looking for. And he would report where they were, what they were doing, if they were going to make a public appearance. And then 4 or 5 days later, he would be reading the newspaper and see where they had been assassinated or killed in a car wreck or fell off of the roof.
Hmm.
Things of that nature. And when that happened, uh, that kind of created a total different atmosphere for him. He wasn't in
Hmm.
combat, but he knew by these guys' names that he had destroyed that family.
Hmm.
I remember he told one of a gentleman that had actually uh, had, I think it was a wife and 4 or 5 children, and the picture that they chose to run in the paper was that of his wife with the 5 children trying to hold on to his uh, casket as they came out of the church or whatever, and the kids bawling and crying. And he said
Hmm.
that affected him a lot. Um,
Yeah.
so he went. He wasn't seeing anyone when I first met him, and I convinced him to go to counseling. And to hear him talk today, his voice is so much better, so much stronger. He has he's accepted his situation, and I think he's going to be okay now. But that's the case that he had gone. He couldn't understand why he couldn't get along with people, and he couldn't understand why he couldn't hold a decent job.
Hmm.
You know, um,
Yeah, that's true. I know I had a vet that I helped out 10 or 15 years ago. He lived down south of you down there in northern Alabama, out toward Florence. And, uh, he was on the USS Lexington, which is the hat that I got on tonight. I'm going to do that in memory of him. And he actually was on board the Lexington. And back when he was on board, it was a training carrier. And that's where everybody that became naval aviators made their first carrier landing was on board the Lexington. And they'd take off and fly them training planes in there, and they'd land on the plane, on the carrier. And his job on board the carrier, he was a catapult operator, captain. And on one certain day, he was in charge of catapult number two. And they're expecting this plane to come in. This guy plane came in, and he was getting off the glide path. So the signalman waved him off. And somehow the guy panicked, and instead of using the stick to move the rudders, he used his feet to hit his brakes when he's driving his car. And the only thing it did was invert the plane upside down. He crashed right before the tower on top of everything. Killed several people. And that explosion just went all over the place. So he dove over the rail and jumped up and got a fire suit and went in trying to help out the fire and stuff. And he messed him up pretty bad. And that was his first time for PTSD. He filed his claim and they laughed at him. But he got Social Security awarded for it, but they denied his VA claim. They said, we can't prove you were there and anything else. So he was talking to me one day and asked him to give me the story so I could, get him to, open up a little bit. And I was going to put him with the right person to help him do his claim and do his appeal. And I said, in all carrier landings tape? He says, yeah, it is. And sure enough, he went to video, did a search for it, and there was the accident on the internet. And it showed a big old dude standing there right there when the plane started to crash. It shows the big old dude diving over into the basket, getting out of the way, and them flames going right across his head. So he jumps up. A few seconds later, comes in. And they're trying to fight the fire and save people. He said, "What am I going to do now?" I said, "Well, you go ahead and download that video and save it on a thumb drive and send that into the VA and link to that as evidence."
Yeah.
And he had a bunch of buddies in there that went to the video, said, "That's him, that's him, that's him." So buddy statements. So he got connected with that. Unfortunately, it didn't last too long, though. His PTSD was really bad. It cost him his family, his house, his boats, and everything. And he wound up getting murdered over some kind of stupid argument. He got into the guy and he couldn't let it go, and the guy shot him. So it's pretty sad. But he's a good
And
guy.
that's one of the side effects that people don't
Mm-hmm.
realize can happen.
Yeah.
I mean, there's this gentleman that I've just started helping a month ago. And I could tell by talking to him that he had some PTSD. Sure enough, he had done 2 tours in Iraq. He
Mm-hmm.
was on the tank. He had actually broken his ankle 3 times, and he now can't move that ankle, that foot. So we were
Mm-hmm.
talking about doing a claim for that, but in our conversation, I could tell he had some other problems. So I started asking him. I said, "Well, does do you go out with friends and stuff on Friday?" "Oh no, I don't do that. No, I'm pretty much a homeboy, or if it's hunting or fishing season, I may go out hunting or fishing, but I just do it usually by myself, or maybe my son might go with me." And then I said, "Well, okay. Well, do you go to church?" He said, "Well," he says, "I do." He said, "But I go to a little small church up here on the mountain. Yeah, we only got 10 members." And he said, "There's 7 or 8 there on Sunday, not very many." And I kept talking to him and finding out more and more. And then I said, "Well, you said you have a son. Where's your wife?" "Oh, she left me, about a year or so after I got back." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, we got to where we didn't see eye to eye. We couldn't make heads or tails."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "So you guys got a divorce?" "Yeah, we got a divorce. I don't want anything to do with her anymore." So all these things add up. One by itself, maybe not, but 4 or 5 things that are common in individuals as suffering from PTSD, um, you just got to connect the dots. I mean, is he more than 60%? Maybe 70,
Mm-hmm.
probably more like 50.
Yeah.
I don't think he has threatened to beat anybody up, or he doesn't get in fights. He's a big old guy. If he ever got in a fight, he'd
Mm-hmm.
hurt somebody bad,
Mm-hmm.
and he's probably about 6'2" and probably weighs close to 300 pounds,
Ooh,
and
Lordy.
just almost all muscle. He's a electronic engineer. I mean, electrician. I'll say it right in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
He's a licensed electrician. So, but he does a little handiwork and stuff like that
Mm-hmm.
around for guys that need stuff done. Does a lot of work for veterans in the community here. But anyway, I'm hoping that things go right and we can get him into the system, get him doing what he needs to do.
That's right, Ray. You do got to do, you can do whatever you need to do to help these vets out. Do what you got to do. I mean, basically, we really, we don't really do veteran claims ourselves. I mean, we're just uh, kind of like points on the map. A, B, C, D. You need to go here, 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 and see these people. That's what we do. We kind of specialize in that. Then when we do that, and get situated. We make sure that the people that we recommend them to go to, they'll take care of things and see their paperwork and things like that, and get them done. Then, of course, we've always done that, and we'll continue to do that. Because I have no uh, wants or needs to be a claims agent or anything like that. I mean, I just want to make a veteran smile and make his life better.
Well,
And
right. That's what it's all about. I mean, I'm like you there, and one thing I've noticed in this particular case, what you're just talking about, the guy didn't know he doesn't have a diagnosis. He's never sat down with a social worker, and that's the first thing that he needs to do. And guys, normally it takes a minimum of three, most of the time 5 or 6 visits with that social worker. You may see them once a week, or if it's real severe, you'll see them twice a week. But
mhm,
once they get that evaluation and they give you the diagnosis, then they will come up a plan or a way to treat you. And
right.
that's the key right there.
Hmm. It's true. I mean, I mean, you need to, if you got any type of mental health issue like that, you're seeing, you're getting VA, care. You might have PTSD. They're going to ask you questions there probably every other time you go in of, how you've been treated and things like that. They talk to you all the time. Usually the intake nurse does it, but it might help to speak to a mental health specialist if they'll see you and have them talk you out like that. And then, if you think you got it and they think you've got it, you go ahead and file a claim. There's certain aspects of PTSD and and mental health conditions that, that should be pretty open to getting the claim passed to get it through. And one, the most common cause, people getting connected for mental health is if you're high rated, uh, say, well, you don't be high rated, but say you're 7% for a certain issue, and maybe maybe your leg can't use your leg or something like that, and you got a 60%, 60 for that leg, and maybe 10% for something else. Well, if you can't walk like you're supposed to and run and play with your kids and things like that, that can cause issues. So you can file that as just depression and anxiety secondary to that, these service-connected conditions, and that might get you. Well, it depends on how severe it is. You can go to 100% PTSD, but they don't like giving that off the bat. Unless you meet the criteria. It used to be they changed the criteria, folks, last year on PTSD. It used to be you had to be pretty severe suicidal just to get 100%, or you couldn't. Basically, it was like total occupational social impairment. It means you had to stay away from people and work. And so they've changed that a little bit, and they've added some caveats in there now. You guys ought to look it up. Title 38, Part 4, Schedule Disabilities. Look it up, PTSD. You can read it. And of course, still pretty severe criteria to get there, but I think it's easier now to get certain levels. And I know several folks that are 100% PTSD, been that way for years. But
Well, you're talking about this one guy here. I know he told me the story. He was 80% PTSD, and
mm,
he said, "Yeah," he said, "I got that pretty quick." I said, "You did?" I said, "What makes you think you got it? Had it happen so fast?" He said, "Well, it was about my third visit, and I went in and I'm talking to the social worker, and she asked me if I'd ever thought about committing suicide." And I said, "Yeah, I thought about it last week." And she said, "Well, how did you plan on doing it?" He said, "Well," he said, that was the easy part." And she said, "Okay, what was?" He says, "Well, we have this little boat ramp close to my house called Devil's Step, and it's where you can launch your boat and stuff." He said, "I figured I'd just go down there and take my shotgun, wade out about waist deep, put that shotgun underneath my chin and pull the trigger." He said, "That way the catfish would have something to eat and it wouldn't mess up the wife's living room." Well, he got his 80% pretty dang quick with that type of whenever you have thought that much into doing
mm-hmm.
it, that's an indication that you're on your way of actually committing that
Hmm.
that making that happen.
But yeah, because how you going to do it, the step, and people do it all the time, and we just had a kid across the street here last year that did it, and he had it real bad. His mom passed away, and he just he overdosed on fentanyl and drugs, and it's pretty sad. But it happens, and you're right. 44 veterans a day. That's kind of an estimated number. They're thinking it's 2.5 times the number what the press is reporting. They're reporting like 20, 22 a day. And so let's say 44 is the actual number, and that's what the charts show. And so that's over 1,600 vets that's a lot of vets every year.
It
You
is.
know, one is too many. You know what I mean?
Yeah, what's interesting
One.
to me, we're seeing more now of the younger soldiers, the guys
Hmm.
coming out of Iraq and Afghanistan, and they're getting out now that are in their you know late 50s, early 60s, because of the fact that most of the ones which they never kept record of, they didn't want to admit it, uh, from right after the Vietnam War, those never got properly recorded. So we don't know how many came out of the Vietnam era. We know that some of them in later years, once they got into their 60s, usually the last 5 or 10 years of their work history, it really started setting up pretty strong. Know once again, I know of a local gentleman. He was fine till about 2 years before he retired. Then he just lost interest, and the PTSD just came on pretty
Hmm.
strong and pretty quick.
Hmm.
Um, and he was
Yeah.
a Vietnam era veteran and served in Vietnam. So there's a lot of that though from the Vietnam era that actually never got properly diagnosed and recorded because it was
Hmm.
still well, I guess probably until what 2010, it was still kind of somewhat brushed under the rug from
Hmm.
by the VA,
Yeah.
and then finally they came along and what was it in 2021 that they did the PAC Act and
Yeah. And PACT
that
Act.
identified it more.
Well, it did to a certain extent, but they're kind of PACT Act looking for more exposure, uh, any type of airborne hazard. Now, it started out years ago with the lady and her husband in Texas. He got some kind of cancer or whatever, and she started suing everybody for the burn pit exposures. And so Congress got together and made this thing up. And it's kind of funny how Congress will make something up like that, and they'll stick it in the VA and dump it on them. And next thing you know, the VA's having to scramble. And as soon as they have to scramble, they got to get a bunch of new people in to help do these claims. And it takes at least 2 or 3 years to get people up to speed. And pretty sad. But the PACT Act itself, I mean, with all these cuts coming down the pike, of course, that's going to slow it down a little bit because the court ruled today they couldn't do it. So we'll see what happens. But anyhow, um, with all the PACT Act, it's just going to cause the claims to be ungodly long processing. You know, like it used to be back in the old days, it took you 7, 8 years to win a claim. Remember those days, right?
I was in them. I did
I
that. It took
know.
me 8 years to win my first claim.
It took me
Yep.
14. Yeah, and I was direct service connected, believe it or not. So pretty sad. And that will give you PTSD. Fighting the DA will give you PTSD, in my opinion.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Hmm.
And I think there's a lot of social workers that believe in that.
Hmm.
And what's kind of interesting now, we're going to see, I think, if what is, I'm beginning to hear down the pipe, you most of the people that you get your evaluations from at first are your social workers that are assigned to your primary care doctors. And if
Hmm.
they're going to cut back on these social workers, um, what's going to happen to your PTSD patients?
That's true. I don't know. That's going to be a good question. But social workers, Uh, got a lot to do with it, but usually your primary care doctor and your specialty care doctors can bypass that, and you can go straight to see mental health. A social worker might assess, your living situation, things like that. And or if you need a caregiver act, and of course they handle a caregiver act, and that's another thing that was dumped in everybody's lap. So
Yeah, without
it is
funds.
without funds. It's pretty sad. It is pretty sad, but that's the way it is. You know, It's pretty sad. But most social workers that I know are pretty decent people. We don't, I don't hear a lot about the caregiver act up here. I know they've got a few of them, but I don't think we've got as many uh, veterans that are as messed up as, for example, say as other places do that are bigger cities.
Right.
And so, that all depends on the population. I want to say there's probably quite a few in the state of Florida because that's the retirement capital of the world. Everybody wants to go to Florida. Everybody wants to go to Florida. Other than that,
You bringing that up about cities, major cities. Major cities always have a homeless problem.
yes, they do.
I'm wondering how many of these homeless veterans are actually service connected or could be service connected for PTSD because of what you said a moment ago, the anger of trying to work with the VA. They just throw their hands up and say, I quit.
Yeah. That's it. So the hands up, say, I just quit. Of course, now it all depends nowadays on the job market. Sometimes the job market's pretty much wide open and people can go work where they want to work and do what they want to do. Uh, then once they get her done, then they can get another job or do whatever. But I mean, sometimes these degrees you get, like social work and other things like that, you're kind of trapped because in order to get a job within the government or teaching, you have to have a master's degree or above. And
Yeah.
it costs a lot of money to get a master's degree now, buddy, and a whole lot to get a PhD. But social workers are good. They've got their purpose. You know, it's kind of like a laundry hamper. As long as you get the right one, you got one for your whites, your colors, and your jeans. You put the right laundry in the right basket. That's VA claims. And if you put the whites in the whites, you put the colors in one, and you put the jeans in the other one. I mean, if you're like some people I know, you got a delicate one, you got special clothes and stuff, it have to be handled with kid gloves. You put them in there and you wash them on a delicate cycle. So,
Oh, man. You're liable to get in trouble tonight.
uh, probably it won't be the first time, and I guarantee you it will not be the last time.
Oh,
Mhm.
me.
I got a big dog house in the backyard, and he had a dog of 30 years.
You got cedar
uh,
shavings in it, huh?
we got everything. Well, I just have to get the spiders and wood bees out of it, but no.
Uh,
But uh, guys, I want to be serious for a minute. I mean, yeah, we cut up a little bit. I'm gonna tell you something. If you've got mental health issues and PTSD, get help. Talk to somebody. Don't clam up and things like that. Don't take it out on your family. If something happens where it triggers your PTSD, just take a walk, get out of there, do something. Go upstairs, get in your room, do something like that. Just leave everybody alone. Get some help. You are tasked with remaining in control as best you can. Because if you don't remain in control, you lose control and wind up like that poor guy that Ray talked about the first of the show. He went out and believed this little girl telling lies, and he went out and bumped off her husband. Okay? Don't let it run your life. Get treatment, get the right medication, get help. It will help you, and anxiety especially.
well, John, you need to look. That's a great point. And guys, you're not the only one affected. Your spouse, your children, your in-laws, your best friends, they all said if all of a sudden you have a whole bunch of friends and the next thing you know, you only have 1 or 2, you need to ask yourself, "How come? What am I doing to run these folks off?" And more than likely, the underlying cause is some minor form or some form of PTSD or some type of a mental problem, whether it's depression with anxiety attacks or what. Um, but get help. That's all we can say is get help.
You're exactly right, Ray. Get as much help as you can. And there's help out there. I mean, if you're thinking suicide, you can call the suicide hotline, call the crisis line. That's, they'll help you out. I mean, when I worked for the VA, one of my units was 2 North, which is here in Lexington, and that was the psych unit. And that place stayed full, veterans. And I had to go up there several times a week, to do rounds and stuff and talk to people and take care of, business stuff. It wasn't nothing to do with with the medical side. But I see people I went to high school with was in there and everything else, and they'd recognize me and I'd shake my head at them. But as soon as I come out of the doors, I was kind of happy. We had one guy that was we had a long term mental health facility across town. It was an old World War II VA. And there was a guy on the second floor, and I worked over there too. And this poor guy would run around the halls, and we're talking you could you could walk from building to building, and they've got tunnels under the ground, and it's a beautiful facility. This guy would run around with a cape on, thought he was Superman. That's how bad he was. Nicest guy in the world, but he was Superman. And so don't look down on somebody that's got PTSD. Be nice to everybody if you can be. And you see people having issues all the time, blow ups and things like that. But once you let your emotions take a hold, it's hard to gain control of it. You know what I'm saying, right?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. You and
Mm-hmm.
I have seen it more than we need to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I guess we see it so much that sometimes when we bump into a guy, a veteran, that just in general conversation, by the time you talk with him for 5 or 10 minutes and leave, you realize he has a level of PTSD or mental problems. You don't know,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not a psychologist and I don't know at what level he has them, but I
Mm-hmm.
know he has them.
Yeah.
You know,
That's also too, then you'll realize too, you talking to the vet, instead of the vet, and they've got PTSD, you can ask them a couple of questions or whatever, and nobody knows for sure. I mean, um, nobody will know. I mean, the guy can tell you he was this and that and this and that, and he may not have been. You never know. You get a lot of folks like that, but it's they got PTSD. Um, in my opinion, PTSD itself is it is a medical diagnosis, but it is basically a diagnosis based off of the examiner and the treating physician's word. Because there's not really any medical test to physically show PTSD, like there is a heart cath or lung problems or whatever, MRIs and things like that. So basically, it's kind of an educated guess by the docs of what you've been through as to what's going on with you now. As you put A and B together, your chance of getting ratings pretty good. But you have to have some kind of event or something for PTSD. Anyways, you got to have some type of stressful event to make it happen, like combat, personal assault, MST, or anything like that. Fear of your life. If you hear somebody trying to kill you, that's basically what you're looking for. You know that, right?
I did. I
Yeah.
did.
Hmm. Yeah, but anxiety and depression is different because it can be based off of service-connected disabilities. And I'm going to tell you, the majority of veterans probably have anxiety and depression because you can't do what you used to do, and you're stuck in a wheelchair, or you're stuck here and stuck there. It's depressing as all get out because your life's changed. You know, I mean, you don't see Ray up there playing the drums anymore.
No,
You know?
couldn't even hold a set of drumsticks anymore.
I know it. And, you can't see him. You don't see me on the lake bass fishing much more, do you?
It's
I
been a
throw every
while.
rod. I throw every rod I had to water. I've done that enough, man. That's how I found out about my service connected issues in my left arm. start throwing rods in the water for no reason. So, but that's the way it is. Well, listen, guys, we're out of time. I want to thank Ray for coming on and being a co-host. We're going to have a good show next week. We're going to try to discuss the VA court, what
Oh,
goes on at
wow.
the VA court. So if I can get somebody to come on, I've got a couple of feelers right now, but I want to discuss this issue since it's kind of an interesting subject right now. And right now, everybody's in kind of turmoil. So, it's kind of, I like to see what they do, and look at some court cases and things like that. But I just want to go with that procedural thing, step A and step B. I might get Alex to come on maybe and we'll walk us through it and what happens when you do your paperwork and who to file and how you get an attorney and things like that and paperwork and how much you got to pay and the perks of getting to court and winning your claim and having the government pay your bill, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
So we need to discuss that. And other than that, well, it's been a good show, folks. You can watch this on YouTube if you want to go back. It's under Jay Basher Expose That page on YouTube. It'll be audioed up to Apple Podcasts and maybe a couple other places. So that on this 13th day, which is Thursday the 13th and not Friday of March
That's a good thing.
2020. Yeah, 2025. This is John on behalf of Ray Cobb and Expose That Productions. We'll be signing off for now.
Good night, guys.